I spent a bit of time with, well, he's a good friend really, and a big watcher of my channel, which is great, and come and drive his kit for the day, and boy does he have some kit. And I'm struggling to film stuff, to be honest, because I'm having such a good time playing with all the kit, to be honest. When it's not yours and it's not your job and it's not your regular thing, you're always a bit nervous, aren't you, operating someone else's kit and trying to keep them going, because you know he's got jobs to do today. You know, you're here to work, not play, and really we do a bit of playing, don't we always, but you know what I mean. And yeah, it's a real privilege to come and have a play on his kit. He's got some absolutely lovely kit. This telehandler far outweighs the spec that I normally drive of a construction one, and once again has a different way of driving it. All these machines seem to have a slightly different way. I guess the Manitous have got the you know, the switch on the joystick, and that does work, but that's on the top. You know, you use your index finger for that, and that kind of makes sense. This has it on the back of the trigger, and as a result it's just a little bit different to operate. You know, that Wacanoose and Wiedemann little telehandler that I drive a lot, the school that I work at, that has a throw switch on the top of the lever, so it's just getting a feel for the different ways. I mean, JCB being JCB, they have installed the traditional shuttle, but you know, we're trying to. The shuttle's good, but it is easier when you get the hang of this trigger. But of course, you've got the bucket tilt on this trigger. You've got, or on your right hand, you've got obviously up and down, telly in and out. There's a lot going on with your right hand. I should be all right with that. Operating tilt rotator. There's plenty going on there as well, but it's tricky to say when you're not sort of used to it, really. But massively enjoying it, absolutely beautiful view out here in sunny Essex. It's spreading a bit of lime, and with any luck, you should be able to see the whole process. Where they get it from, drying it, to this bit, which is the you know, the spreading of it on the field. I'll take you inside the spreader in this video and show you what's going on there. The spreader, there's a lot going on with this. He has done some extensive modifications over the years to this big A, so as rare a machine as it is anyway in its own right, he really has made this one truly unique. And yeah, a man who really knows what he wants from his machinery. And I guess, you know, why we get on so well, always thinking about ways to improve the job, make it better, more efficient, quicker, and he's certainly done that. Oh, I'm throwing this all over the back of the bucket now. It's very easy with this machine to accidentally crowd the bucket because the lever is so light. It's tricky. Might not do me. For a load. Go jump in the cab. Go spreading. So we've got all the regional engine dials over here, and then your secondary engine dials over there. GPS screens, speedos, spinners, and of course, at the moment, a full window out the back. It's going for it. That your map, they must be pH levels.
That's all the pH levels we took, yeah.
So you do quite extensively test a field then?
Yeah, we try and test 1 an acre really. So that's what we're trying to go for, 1 an acre. We had a customer who we did a lot of testing for, and he was quite happy with 1 per hectare, which was fine by us because it's a lot of testing. It was enough testing as it was at 1 per hectare without doing 1 an acre.
Yeah.
So that was fine by us really. But most of it's 1 per acre. And yeah, they're all the results that we've taken. Otherwise you don't get a good, a good impression of where the field is generally. You could easily go in a field and take 2 or 3 samples that would tell you it's fine. It's not.
Yeah.
Some people are being caught out by their testing that they do for P&K, which is a bulk sample. That might be half a dozen points around the field, but it's all stuck in 1 bag, mixed up, taken to a lab, and then they dry it and grind it, so they've released stuff in the soil that isn't actually available to the plant, i.e. lime. They've increased the pH of that sample, then they do the P&K test, send a report, and at the top of the P&K test it says your field is pH 7.5.
Yeah.
And they think, oh, that feels fine. And then, they leave it, a year or 2 goes by, and they think, why isn't this field performing?
Yeah.
It's just the pH is wrong. This sort of stuff is what takes a lot of time.
Yeah, short work always does.
Short work is painful sometimes, especially if you end up in short work that's in a triangle, in a corner. It's really difficult to do that nicely because you're always turning and trying to turn back on the next line and there's nothing to look at. It's really awkward. Just trying to do it as efficiently as possible really, but there's nothing, as far as I'm concerned, there's nothing more efficient than keeping moving.
Yes.
Keeping moving forward. If you stop and you need to reverse up, then I think that's wasted time. You could argue that you can shunt on a headland faster than you can do a loop. I doubt that.
No, I doubt it, yeah. So this is your Big A lime spreader, made by Big A.
Made by Big A, actually made by a company called
AgChem, yeah.
in America. So this came from America in, we're going to say 1996.
Yeah, it's nice. It's on a P, isn't it?
It's on a P, so it's a 96 machine. It was imported by Bunns at Great Yarmouth, and they ran it in their fleet for 10 years before I bought it. And then started modifying it.
So the modifications extend to.
Yeah.
Well,
so
it's still got the original engine.
The original
engine transmission.
It's got a Cummins 8.3 or a 6 CTA 8.3A. So that's a special 8.3 engine designated for agricultural machine.
Yeah. It sounds lovely, as they all do.
Got a Allison
Whopping
MT
turbo
643 gearbox.
Yeah.
4-speed auto. And that drives into a Dana Spicer 4-speed manual box, which then drives the Rockwell axle, and that is unchanged basically. That's as they came out of the factory. I've done some refurbishments around the front. Last year we rewired the front, had the rad out, basically give it a birthday in the front end. Some new pipes, rerouted some hydraulics that weren't very nicely routed. Just looked after it really, but basically the front end of it and the engine transmission is all original. There are some maybe tweaks, brackets here that that I've thought. But other than that, it's as it should be at the front. The fuel tank is original, but should be about 2 foot further back. And the batteries used to sit on this side, and they're now on the other side because I had to move the fuel tank forward.
Because we
squeeze in
fitted another engine. Yeah, well, why not?
So the other engine drives the hydraulics basically, which is for the belt and the spinners on the back.
Yep.
And the hydraulic pump, which is on the end of the engine, used to be driven off of a PTO, which was on the transmission.
Yep.
Because it's an automatic transmission, you're driving it through a torque converter, the pump flow is never constant.
Yep.
And in different conditions, when you're pulling hard or when you want maximum flow, you could never guarantee that you'd got the flow you wanted to do the job you wanted. There was always a compromise.
Yeah.
And not the only solution, but a very basic solution was suggested that if I could drive the pump through a different source,
independent of engine speed,
engine speed, independent of gearbox speed, then I would have a much better chance of driving the things I want to drive at the rate I want to drive them.
Yeah.
And I then thought, well, what if I stick another engine on the side?
So it's a JCB power pack.
It's a JCB power pack that basically is as it comes. The air filter should sit on the end a bit lower down, but basically the air cleaner was the only thing I had to alter on the entire power pack. Obviously I've fitted it there as tightly as I can just to get it up and in as far as possible.
Well, and it fits really well. I mean, it's well within the tyres and the width of the machine, isn't it? So
the machine. But so the air cleaner is the only thing that's not where it should be as the power pack comes delivered on the pallet. So that came with its own set of clocks, controls, ignition. You literally had to give it fuel, and away she went.
Once you worked out the secondary button.
Yeah, to work out the secondary button, which is a really weird way of starting the engine.
Yes.
How it was wired. So that's basically a standalone engine. It's got its own battery. It's got its own set of controls. The throttle is controlled pneumatically, so it idles at 1100 RPM and then runs at 2100 RPM when the spinners are going.
Yes.
So when the belt's
moving.
So it revs are only increased when the belt is moving. Otherwise, it's idling.
Which it does automatically,
It does automatically. So literally, that's just controlled on that pneumatic cylinder on the side, and the controls for that are in that white box on the chassis there. So that's a fairly big modification, but
you said transforming the machine.
Absolute transforming machine. It made 4 to 5 kilometres an hour difference in forward speed doing the same job. That's massive. In a job like this, you know. So. And it's not just that, it's not just the forward speed. I'd have been happy if it did the job at the same speed. The other benefits are you're not thrashing the main engine anywhere near as hard to try and get the pump speed. It's completely irrelevant, you know. If you were going downhill, you could turn the engine off if you wanted to. Not that you would on that or on an automatic transmission, but in theory,
you don't. It's irrelevant,
it's
really.
Completely irrelevant to the job it's doing. So when you are going downhill, that's doing no work at all. And obviously, turn uphill, it's got to pull a bit harder. But again, that's completely irrelevant to what's happening with the actual spread inside of it. That stays at a complete constant, which is a massive benefit. The transmission doesn't get so hot, the engine doesn't use as much fuel, it doesn't use oil, and it used to use oil, and that's not uncommon for a big
older engine
to use, and it's not new, but it's not done masses of work, but it used to use a bit of oil. Now I rarely put any oil in it, and that just shows there's nothing wrong with the engine. The engine's not worn out.
No.
But I was putting maybe a litre in it every day or every 2 days.
Oh right, yeah, quite a
So
bit
it's
then,
using
really.
oil
Yeah.
because it's working so hard. I don't do that now. You know, I might put half a litre in once a week. You know, when you look at what I've done with it in a week, I might have spread 1,500 tonne.
Yeah.
You know, so
You
know straight away that
it can use a bit.
you're
Yeah.
not working it so hard. It's quieter in the cab. It's, you know, just far more on top of the job.
Yeah.
And the other thing is all the power that hydraulic pump was drawing out of the transmission. It's now effectively given that back to the driveline.
Yeah.
So pulling up a hill fully loaded, it's got far more going in.
Yeah, you've got more available horsepower
and
to
I had
use.
a reasonable idea that was going to be the case, because when this was running in its original configuration, or the configuration I had it in before that engine went on, without even actually spreading anything, if you were pulling uphill in a field with the spinners going, just the spinners going, nothing being put on them, soon as you switched them off, it'd shift up a gear and go.
Right.
Without touching the throttle. You know, without giving it any more revs.
Yeah.
It just, away it went. As soon as you switch the spinners off. So just that act of...
And they wouldn't have been taking a lot of flow.
No load. Well,
No.
they were taking something to spin them.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
But so I knew that there was going to be a benefit to that, in that regard, and it's proved that undoubtedly.
Well,
I say the benefits of that engine. It looks a mad thing sat on the side of
I
it,
don't think it does actually. It looks really tidy.
but the benefits are more than I've explained just there. It's, you know, there's things I've forgotten about
Yeah.
probably now that were instantly better, and literally better overnight. And I suppose that was the benefit of the way I did it, because I probably stupidly actually did this part of the project during a season. So on a day off,
Nothing like a good deadline.
no. On a day I'd actually started spreading, and then on a couple of days off, I got it in the workshop. I moved the fuel tank, made that frame and mounted the engine, and then painted it and stuck it back to work, and was using it. I'd used it with nothing on that frame. Done a few jobs, and then I finally bit the bullet and said, right, I'm going to get it back to the yard, and I'm going to, over a weekend, I'm going to drop the engine on, put the pump on, and away we went. And to a degree we did, but when I took the pump off of the hydraulic pump, I realised that the shaft was worn, and luckily the guy who does all the pumps and everything had a shaft in stock. Couldn't ask for better service than that, and I had a new shaft put in it on the Monday and went to work on the Tuesday. So
Nice.
that was, you know, not quite as it should have been, but
No.
I was brave to have done it like that anyway.
Yeah.
So I was working on the Friday and I was working again on the Tuesday, and I had that as the difference. So, but the brilliant thing with that was it wasn't something I did over the winter and then went to work and thought, oh, this is better than it was last year. It was like, oh, wow, this wouldn't do this on Friday.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? That was, it was literally an overnight. I can remember how we were going on Friday, and,
Yeah.
and this is just phenomenal. And
I'd say there's people who have been down for longer with the machine with a puncher, and you've managed to fit an entire engine.
well, I had
Squeeze it in at the weekend.
I had done the groundwork for it, and
Yeah.
I'd made the control system for it, and I'd got the wiring in. I'd got all that done basically, but I hadn't got the engine on there doing nothing. And I mounted it. One benefit to the way we did it was we made sure that pump was the pump that would go back on.
Yeah.
And if the worst happened, my idea was if the worst happened to that engine, or the whole idea didn't work, I could bolt that pump back on within an hour or two, and I could go back to work out.
Yeah, you've got that
The
option.
reality of it is now, having run like this for so long and realised the benefits for so long, if something went wrong with that engine, I would
You'd be working hard to
I'd
fix
work
it.
really hard to before
Yeah.
I said, oh, we're going to have to go back to how we were, because that would not be a good day. So yeah, it was a big thing, and it wasn't a cheap thing to play around with, but it was it was probably the best thing I've done to this machine. Definitely.
So, and it's not even the biggest thing you've done to it.
Probably not the biggest thing, no.
You've made your entire body.
Because the entire body was made, yeah. Yeah, made the entire body. That's been...
all bespoke.
Yeah, it was made... Well, it was actually made to fit the previous machine I had, which was essentially a very similar machine, and to the untrained eye, you would say it was the same machine, but it was a... This is a big A2800, and the machine I had before was a 2600. Had a different engine, had the same transmission, a slightly different back axle, was a Rockwell, but not the same as this. These were, well, they were the last, we can call them the pinnacle of the big A, because they were the last big A. But these were the, you know, were the machine, in my opinion. And the 2600 was a good thing for its day, but it was a bit more dated, and that's what we had, and that's what we made that body for. And it's, you know, over 20 years now, that body. It's got its original coat of paint on it, which sadly is the wrong colour for this machine. One day I will paint it, but it continues to go out and work.
Yeah, earn money.
And earn money. So yeah, the body was made by ourselves in our yard to try and do a better job of the product that we spread, because the original bodies for this weren't suitable. Basically, they weren't suitable for the product we were trying to spread. So that's why we invested the time and money into building a body, and to a large degree that the basics of that body have not changed since we built it. Some things have happened on the spinners at the back, that's been altered. Obviously the way we drive it with the hydraulics has been altered.
Yeah, with the new engine.
You know, we've had various incarnations of spinner motors and that kind of thing, but the basic fabrication of it is as it was. All the hydraulics on the side, they've been a process of evolution over the years. I think there's one valve in there that's not even the original valve, but it's in its original location doing its original job, but everything else is stuff that's been added over the years as things have developed. How we control the belt and how we control the spinners have changed. So there's been a lot of extra pipe work and stuff. It looks a bit spaghetti, but it sort of makes sense to me.
It all works. Then you said you fitted more hydraulic filters to allow free flow from the spinner motors.
The original machine had a single pump and therefore a single supply, so that used to drive the belt and then used to drive the spinners and then used to go back to tank. In a bid to try and get the spinners going better on that machine, we put a much bigger oil filter on the return, this double affair, and it would have been this one on the outside. That's what we fitted originally to try and help that, and it undoubtedly helped, but you know, there was limits to what we could do with that original machine. And when I put this machine together, I made an effort to make sure we got a tandem pump, so we could completely separate the spinner hydraulics from the belt hydraulics. They're using the same oil, but that's where it ends really. So everything from the pump to the tank is completely separate. They don't share. Well, the only thing they share is the motor bleed offs. They go back down the same line, but that's not a big deal. So when I needed an extra return line, I needed an extra filter. So we replicated what we'd done on the other one. So we've now got these 4 hydraulic filters, which is a costly thing to...
Yes.
It's like 150 quid's worth of filters. But you know, you don't...
But in the interests
you don't need to change those filters. They've been changed this year, but they don't need to be changed every year. The hydraulics aren't doing that many hours a year. I do a very short window of working with this. We do a lot of stuff in a short time. When you look at the actual hours, for a hydraulic filter, it's nothing.
Yeah.
So they might get changed every 5 or 6 years. So
Yeah,
it's not
the worst
the end
really.
of the world. Whereas if I was running maybe everything through one filter, I might think, oh, I'd better change this every year.
Well,
so at the end of the
same
day,
cost then, really, isn't it?
It's not a big deal.
For, 4 over 5 years is the same as 1 every year.
They don't get changed that regularly, but the oil is very, very clean. We actually run 1540 engine oil in this hydraulics.
All right.
We always have, and that was something that came from the original machine that had 1540 in it. And I won't take the credit for that idea. That was Buns, and they said they get less leaks. Sorry, they get less leaks, less problems with engine oil. I think probably there's a trade-off there with the oil getting too hot, because it will go out of spec when it gets too hot and get too thin. So that's something we've dealt with an oil cooler. But I can't disagree on the engine oil side of it. I think that's not a bad shout. Remembering we're running motors, we're not running rams.
No, that's true, but I'd have still thought the same thing. It's under pressure, isn't it? Quite a lot more pressure than it would expect to be in an engine.
It works.
Fine, whatever works,
absolutely
works.
Fine for us. The motors,
it's a lot cheaper.
Last year I replaced the gear sets in the spinner motors, and I only replaced those for a different size to try and get a different performance, or better performance, which is what I'm always trying to do. Better performance. So I changed the gear sets in the motors, but the old ones were like new, and they've done 100,000 tonne of material. So I'm not saying they wouldn't have looked like that with hydraulic oil.
Yeah.
But I can't look at the wear on the motors and think, oh, that's really bad because we've got engine oil.
Yeah.
It might be an old wives' tale, and it might be a complete load of rubbish, but it's not worse. So it works for us.
Works.
And
you've put enough hours on it.
So that's basically what we run in it, always have, and I don't see a reason not to. So yeah, the oil cooler is another addition. That was actually put on before the engine, because I'd realised that performance was out of the spinners particularly. That's where the problem is always, and that's the limit of the performance of this machine, is those spinners. And I'd realised that the performance really dropped off once I'd got the machine warm, and I didn't know what that temperature was. So I started to monitor the oil temperature and realised that once it got to, I think from memory, it was 65 degrees, the performance just visibly in the mirrors, I could see that the spread wasn't as wide, and things weren't running as well. And essentially, once you get to that point, if you continue to keep going and the spread width has reduced, as long as you've got a good overlap, it's not the end of the world. But I realised the performance wasn't there, and of course once the oil's hot, it's not going to get cold.
You'll never
until you park it up for the night.
Yeah.
So the decision was made to fit an oil cooler, and that dealt with that straight away. So the oil is kept at a decent temperature to keep the performance out of the spinners, and there might be the argument for running hydraulic oil, but it might be more stable at the higher temperatures.
Yeah.
But I don't know, and I wasn't about to try it, because that would have been a massive thing to have changed all the oil anyway.
Oh God, yeah. So purge it all out.
We fitted the cooler, and that worked really well. So that's obviously an electric fan. It's got a thermostat on it, or a temperature sender, so that comes on when it wants to.
Yep.
It's also reversing by itself, so it doesn't get blocked up with straw.
Nice.
So now and again it will swap directions, suck and then blow, so it never gets blocked. And that's literally untouched since the day I fitted it. And because we've got 2 returns, we've only used one of the returns, but we've used the spinners because they're the ones that get the hot, probably generate the most heat.
Yeah.
To be fair, So yeah, that was an addition. The box under there has got the battery in it for the engine that's on the other side. Just in front of that is the air tank that used to live on the other side, that had to come this side when the engine went on. So there were a lot of things that had to...
it wasn't all done over the weekend. You'd made that prep.
It's easy to think, oh, I've stuck the engine on over the weekend. Well, yes, I did.
Yeah.
But the preparation for that started a long time before, and a lot of things had to be right. Like the air tank, you know, I didn't have to just move the tank. I've got to move the plumbing, I've got to make different pipes, etc, etc. So all that had to be done, and it's got to be working for me to say, oh, I can go and spread something today.
Yeah.
You know, and that's how it had to be. It had to be, I was working on it, but it was sort of ready to go whenever I wanted it.
Yeah.
So that's how I did it, basically. But I was, as I said to you, I bought the engine with a view to putting it on. Bought it in before the season and never got time. And that season passed, and the engine had 2-year warranty, and I thought, I've got to put this thing on before the warranty runs out. And the next year I thought, I must do that, and of course just didn't get time, and I took the decision to do it whilst, you know, mid-season, which, you know, was probably a brave move, but as I said earlier, it was fantastic in that respect, because I could literally see the benefits overnight. There was no getting away from it. The performance from Friday to Tuesday was second to none.
I love that. I love it. It's all about realising the machine could work better, thinking of how can I do that, and every single thing you've done here is a little tweak, a little something. We'll try that. I mean, I say a little tweak. You made your own body.
No, but
it's quite a big tweak. But essentially, it's all little tweaks to try and improve that performance and work with what you've got. And you've ended up with something that you can buy parts for that engine. You can buy parts for the Cummins. You know, you haven't made it too bespoke where it's unmaintainable.
No. Everything I fitted is stuff that I can replace, replicate, and anything I've made, if I've made it, I can make it again. So, do you know what I mean? There are very few parts for this machine, because it's an old machine now.
Yeah.
The ownership of the rights to it, shall we say, or certainly more importantly, the parts support for this machine has now changed hands through so many companies, and let alone dealers. You know, you get a letter 1 minute saying, oh, your parts people are now this, now it's this, now it's them, and now it's Ploger, which are building some very fancy looking machines that I shall never be able to afford for my job. But their part support is through that company, and to be fair to them, they're not really interested in supporting parts for a nearly 30-year-old machine.
They didn't make a sale of this machine, did they? They've got no...
They're not really worried about it, to be fair. So I can't get too upset about that. It's an old machine, and I've got to realise that when things need replacing that I can't go and buy off the shelf that are specific to this machine, I've got to find something that can replace that item, or make it. But engine is a Cummins, the parts are easily available for that. The transmission is an Allison, parts are available for that. There's people that will rebuild that. I have spare transmissions myself anyway, so I'm not worried about that. The Spicer gearbox, I have a spare, but I've rebuilt that once or twice myself. Bearings in it mainly that go. The back axle I've rebuilt several times, and that's an ongoing thing that I need to try and find parts for. That's probably my biggest problem at the moment, is getting parts for that axle, because it's a Rockwell axle, and there were many vehicles off-road and on-road in the UK that used Rockwell axles, but there was nothing ever made for the UK or officially imported to the UK apart from these machines that had that specific type of Rockwell axle. I've heard it called a Rockwell wide track. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but it's a heavy duty off-road axle, and consequently when we've contacted, when you could speak to somebody at Rockwell in the UK, I think Rockwell got again bought out by another company, Axle Tech I believe, and I think they're now bought out by Meritor. So we're getting too far down the line. We get into stuff that's like that's probably a 30-year-old design, maybe more, and the ownership of part support and design have changed hands so many times. They're not.
Yeah, you'll have lost the knowledge
You've
as
lost
well.
the knowledge.
It's gone.
Rockwell in the UK, when we spoke to them 20 years ago about the other machine, had never heard of this kind of axle. So that's the kind of thing you're up against with an imported machine that's got unusual stuff on it. But like I say, it's not the end of the world. We can get parts. I've got second-hand spares myself, which I've used this year actually in that axle, but I am trying to get some parts from America to rejuvenate the hubs. There's some wear in there which I'm not very happy with, which I'll sort out.
Well, you never know. Power of YouTube.
Well, maybe, but I mean, I've got options.
Make friends in high places.
I've often thought about changing the axle.
Or to something a bit more known.
Well, a Volvo dump truck axle would suit.
I love your style.
Well, it would. Maybe an A25, maybe an A30 axle.
Yeah.
The parts are available.
Yeah, there's good knowledge on them.
There's good knowledge on them. The axles are available in the UK, but there are several unknowns to fit in that. The rims we definitely have to change because the chances of the flanges being the same width are probably slim. So I'd have to have different rims or alter these rims.
Yeah.
You've got ratios to deal with.
Yeah, I was going to say gearing, yeah.
We've also got brakes to worry about.
Yeah.
These are drum brakes, S-can drum brakes, the same as a truck. They look the same as a truck, and in fact I can get the shoes relined. What I can't get in this country are the brake drums. They're unique for some reason. Well, I know the reason, the holes where they're bolted on, because a truck brake drum fits over the wheel studs.
Yeah.
But this bolts on from the other side. So it's got the same number of holes in it, but they're smaller diameter. So using a truck brake drum is not going to work.
Yeah.
So they're a bit of a problem because they're like £1,000 each for brake drums. But you can get them from America again. The shoes you can have relined in this country, no problem. But if we go back to the Volvo and I want to fit a Volvo axle, that's going to have discs. Now, I've then got to have air over oil to run disc brakes, or to run the Volvo disc brakes. An A25 Volvo runs twin calipers on the front, and I often thought you wouldn't necessarily need a front axle, but if you had a front axle brake caliper carrier, you could effectively run twin brakes, or twin calipers on the rear axle of this. The real unknown is, would I have better or worse brakes than I've got now?
Yes.
And I can tell you for a fact I would not want worse brakes.
Yeah.
Brakes,
right, that's telling.
the brakes aren't bad, but you would not want worse brakes.
Yeah.
So, and I go to great lengths to make sure these brakes are best they can be every time. So I wouldn't want, if you start changing axles and too much is different, and before you know it something's not as good, then you've made some big changes. You could change up. You would no doubt have to change the flanges on the chassis. Once you've done that, you're not bolting one of these axles back on without going backwards. So changing the axles sounds a great idea, but in reality it would still cost a lot of money, and I believe it would cost as much as buying the parts for this one.
Yeah.
So while I've got some second-hand spares of my own, and while I can buy the parts as much aggro as it is getting from America, while I can still buy the parts, I've got to stick with keep rebuilding this axle. So that's where I am with it.
Fine.
So yeah.
Well, that's pretty good run around the machine.
The part that needs it.
And of course, the burning question are these just monstrous tyres, which must. You spec them off a monster truck or something.
Well,
they're huge, aren't they?
To be honest, they're original. That's a Goodyear, which is the original manufacturer of this Terra tyre.
Yeah.
Probably got Terra tyre written on it somewhere. Yeah, Goodyear Terra tyre there. You can just barely see it.
Yeah. There'd be the sizes behind the fork, isn't it, typically?
6 by 43 by 25. They were that was a second-hand tyre I bought. I believe they were imported from America by the tyre dealer. Bought a pair of them as second-hand. I've used that one on the front. This is the other one to that pair. And last year it had new tyres on the rear, but the rears are Firestones because Goodyear they don't make them anymore.
No.
I don't know whether Goodyear are back in the ag market, but they literally pulled out of the ag market about 5 years ago. I think could be more now, and said we're not making agricultural tyres. And I, for a company like Goodyear, I thought that was just ridiculous.
They're one of the major players. You'd have
thought, but whether they are back in it now, I don't know. But basically, you can't buy a Goodyear, and as much as they were the original manufacturer of that tyre, in my opinion, in this size, that Firestone is the tyre. They're 16 ply, these are 10. See, they did these tyres in as little as 6 ply.
Right.
Which you
would very bouncy, wouldn't they?
You wouldn't want on this machine. So it 10 minimum we'd want, but 16's on the rear. And you can put 10 tonne in the back of that, and there's hardly any tyre deflection. You know, the sidewalls barely look like they've got anything on them.
What pressure do you run? Must be very low, I'd have thought.
Oh, they've got 25 in the back,
okay,
and 18 in the front. So they're well within spec on the tyre pressure.
I just think what they cost. It's just
they were about $3,000 a bit. Yeah. But
they'll last another 20 years, won't they?
They were a lot of money, but they will last. They will last me a long time. The ones that were on it before lasted me a long time. Sadly, the ones that were on it before they weren't cuts, they were splits in one of the sidewalls. And you might think I'm mad for buying Firestones again, but I still think they're the best tyre.
Yeah.
But these splits were on the inside of one tyre, and I worried about it enough that I had a major repair done on it, and it didn't fix it. It split again, and I had it done again, because every time they do a major repair, the tyre goes out of shape.
Yeah.
I sort of wish I'd never bothered and never spent the money on them, but I suppose the benefit to it was they did put a big patch gate or whatever you call it on the inside, so whilst the outside didn't look so good, they had added
reinforced
strength.
the inside,
Strength to the inside, so maybe it was a job well done. And they never went bang. So I can't grumble.
That'd be bad news. You've only got 3 wheels to start with. Lose one, that's not good news.
What happened to the old tyres was the rubber between the cleats was moving when the tyre was flexing, and it actually wore off, and you could see the cords in between some of the cleats. Not all over, but it started to show in a few places, and
it's not good, is it? Yeah.
They were worn. They'd done really well. There wasn't a lot of tread left on them, but they weren't worn out. They weren't slick by any stroke of the imagination, but when you start seeing the cords, you start to worry. And that was... So we decided it's got to have new tyres, and we went for them. But I did burst 2 tyres on the previous machine, both in the same season.
On the back?
Yeah, this side. It was fully loaded, and I'd just pulled away from the heap, and I think I might have turned slightly, and the bead broke, and the tyre come off the rim.
Ooh.
And
so like proper catastrophic failure then?
It's catastrophic failure, because what I hadn't realised, and they were Goodyears on the rear, loads of tread on them, tyres looked really good, they were the tyres it came with. What had happened, because bunds used to do fertiliser.
Yeah.
Of course, I reckon fertiliser had got in and rusted.
Oh, the rim.
That rusted the bead.
Yeah.
The tyres never went down, they never needed air, but literally all of a sudden, the horizon was at a funny angle, and that frightened the life out of me. I can't believe it never rolled over.
Yeah. Because there's a long way between the rim and the floor.
But it went bang. We got a tyre the next day, up and running again. And a week exactly.
You got another tyre?
Yeah, a week. But well, it was a cheap.
I was going to say, you ring up the local tyre shop and ask for something.
It was only a cheap
68 wide, yeah.
It was a cheap Chinese radial that we put on it. That's what we could get instantly.
Yeah.
We literally got it the next day, put it on, and exactly a week after, I wasn't that far from here actually, and went down the headland, turned into the bout, bang, the other side went. A week later. You couldn't write that.
Couldn't write that, no.
The only trouble with that one was it popped off the inside of the rim.
Ah.
These rims have got the lock-in ring where you take the tyre off on the inside, whereas my previous machine, they were on the outside. And we had a bit of a struggle to get because it's gone the wrong way, you know. So we got it off in the end. I don't remember how, but
of course you're in a field.
We were in a field, and the first time it was beautiful weather like this, and of course the second time the heavens opened and we were covered in mud. But,
lovely.
You know, things happen.
That's running machines.
That was running machines. So.
Well, awesome bit of kit. I've had the luxury of having a couple of spins up and down. Yeah, it gets a fair shift on. Very, very impressive. Yeah, thanks for talking us through it.
No problem.